Of course, no one knows exactly where this vitally important story is headed in the next few months. But before we leave you tonight, we wanted to have an expert peer into the future, as it were, at least as best we can, to try to anticipate what is coming next. And for that, we are joined by Stephen Morse. He is a professor of clinical epidemiology at Columbia University's Mailman School of Public Health. Welcome. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
You have, like many scientists, have had a couple of weeks to sort of watch as this disease, this flu, has progressed along. Given what you've seen, how do you see this flu epidemic playing out in the weeks and months to come, beginning in Mexico?
Well, of course, the first thing I'll say is that people who work with the flu have developed a great deal of respect for its unpredictability. So, you have to, obviously I have to give any prediction very carefully. In Mexico, it seems to be quieting down now, but it also seems probably widespread. On the other hand, I think that we're still sorting out what's happened in Mexico. But it looks as if now it's no longer focused in Mexico. It's now everywhere else in the world.
Well, if it has or shows an indication of subsiding in Mexico, what about here in the United States? What's it doing?
Well, clearly we've had a number of cases here in New York City and a number of other places, and I think it'll continue to spread throughout the United States. And that's generally what the flu does if it's able to get from person to person, as this one can. You can expect that you'll see more cases of the flu. So far they've been very mild cases, so many people may not even be aware that they have the flu, except they have a fever and sort of feel flu-like.
And for the world as a whole, do you see it progressing in a similar fashion?
I think that's very likely. I would be very surprised if it doesn't continue its march throughout the world. Well,
last week the World Health Organization indicated that a pandemic was imminent. Do you still think that's the case?
I think it's very likely, but that simply means that this virus is likely to spread all over the world. And what that means is that this is a virus that's essentially novel to the human population, so we don't have pre-existing immunity to it, at least most of us don't, and it spreads relatively well from person to person. It just has to spread as well as the ordinary sort of garden variety flu to be able to do that. And if it's novel, then it'll get around the world and become a pandemic virus.
We've been told that the flu doesn't like warm weather, doesn't like high humidity. We're coming into the summer months in the northern hemisphere. Is it likely then that as a result this flu will die down somewhat?
It's possible. I'm always wary of generalizations because seasonality is something we talk about a lot, and in temperate climates, very clearly, this is a wintertime disease. But in subtropical areas, they often see two peaks, one in the winter, one in the summer. Hong Kong, for example, Vietnam and Thailand. Sometimes the summer peak is bigger than the winter peak. So I think that generalizations about seasonality, have to be made very carefully. However, it's quite possible that it will die down in the summer. And then, of course, the question is what's going to happen in the fall.
Well, and then we have those who live in the southern hemisphere where they're going into winter as opposed to we going into summer. What would happen down there with this flu?
It's probably going to be like a flu season with a lot of people infected, very similar to what we would expect. Of course, as I say, prediction here is always dangerous, but, and especially with influenza, so many experts have made mistakes because it's so unpredictable. But I think it's a fairly safe assumption that it's going to become pretty widespread down there, and then might come back to us from the Pacific area, as many flu viruses do historically.
And speaking of history, when we look back at the pandemic of 1918, there was an initial bout of the flu that was relatively mild, and it was when it repeated or came back when it seemed to take on a greater lethality. Is that what possibly could be a concern with this particular flu?
Well, it's one reason that people in public health and certainly in the healthcare community need to remain watchful, and we continue being vigilant. We can't afford to be complacent just because it's mild now or just because it dies down. For the average person, I think the important thing is simply to take the usual precautions that I think everyone's heard about by now, and to be very careful, keep on top of the news and keep on top of the information. But for people working behind the scenes in public health, obviously we'll be maintaining vigilance and very great watchfulness just in case it comes back in another wave, as pandemics usually do.
How long to make a vaccine for this?
On the average, it takes about 6 months to make a vaccine. It's a little bit complicated by the fact right now that we're still in the process of making the seasonal vaccine, the one for the regular seasonal flu. And since that's already just in the process of winding up, that will be finished, and then the vaccine factories will move on to this new one. So I expect probably about 6 months as average.
And this has to be a worldwide effort. You can't have one country make a vaccine and somebody else not.
No, absolutely. I mean, this flu is going to be worldwide, and the flu usually is worldwide when we see it. So all the efforts have to be worldwide, and I think it's really essential that the countries that are wealthy and have the resources share them with other countries, because this is a worldwide problem. We're all in this together. We obviously can't cut off even countries like Australia that are essentially island continents, have the flu almost every year the same way we do during their winter time. So I think we really have to all work together.
Stephen Morse, thank you very much for talking with us.
My pleasure. Thank you.